Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
Oh, yeah.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends. A real change.
Wiggle and squirm as you might, it is really hard to put lipstick on a pig.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises.
WTF.
Here.
I know this place is where I am. No other place is better. No matter where I go, I am proud to be Canadian. I am, you know I am. The worst that works.
The one we call Canadian.
Gentlemen, beam me aboard.
Yourselves are stealing the lifeblood from our city. You are a parasite who leeches off
just like you,
the culture of drugs. Excuse me? What?
I got the shotgun. Got the briefcase. It's on the game, though.
Morning, everybody. What's up? Just Ehren right here, Canadian Looney. So, just a couple of minutes to question period, but we've got this new setup we're working on, and just to show you, like, we can post the comments now. Like, I think that's great. So, again, this is the first time I'm trying this with this software. It's not the first time I'm trying, it's the first time I think it's working. Anyhow, we'll get into some videos, try to show you. The interface is different. This is new. I tried this a couple of times, and I think maybe now. I was up all night. I have not slept. Been up for 27 hours. But we're ready to go. I think this is going to work. Let's get into it.
I asked this flippantly, but seriously, just because they're all...
I'm appalled. I'm absolutely appalled. I categorically reject anything that they have put out, and I think my record of serving Canada stands clear. I'm a cabinet minister that has been fully vetted by the security apparatus of that do that for cabinet. So I categorically reject any of this, and it's irresponsible for people to be putting out there insinuating, and slagging my personal reputation.
Well, where's it all coming from?
You're going to have to ask them. But I want to tell Canadians that I am a loyal Canadian. I serve my country, I serve my constituents, and that I hold dearly, and I work very hard every single day for the people of this country, and to and to make life a little bit better for people every day. Thanks, Chris. Thanks.
Suspenders and Mr. Sassy coming out and asking now for a secret ballot.
Listen, I'm. Yeah, wasn't that yesterday? I haven't seen what they've said.
It was last night. Yeah.
It was last night. They asked for a secret ballot. To me, I've made that clear many times. The decision falls with the Prime Minister. He's made it clear that he wants to lead the Liberal Party in the next election. To me, it's his prerogative, and I think we need to unite
So they need to stop trickling down out this, these MPs asking for a secret ballot. Should the dissenters just stop talking about it?
I think at some point we need to move on and turn the page on this chapter and unite to fight the next election and offer a positive alternative to Canadians. Thank you.
Est-ce que vous faites de Mme Mendez, M. Sassi, qui demande un vote secret aussi? C'est pas fini, là,
J'ai
visiblement.
pas vu ça ce matin, je vais être honnête. J'avais 2-3 affaires, puis j'étais même avec...
I'm good, thanks. As soon as Justin Trudeau's ready to end the cover-up of this $400 million scandal involving their green slush fund, turn the documents over to the RCMP, then we can of course get on to the next Liberal scandal. But this is of course exceptional. Quite the argument the government's making. There's been a crime. It's worth 400 million Canadian tax dollars, and instead of calling the cops, they want to call a committee. The information needs to go to the RCMP, and then we can deal with the next set of misdeeds of Justin Trudeau and the NDP Liberals. Thank you.
How long last, though? Until Christmas?
Until Justin Trudeau's ready to provide transparency and be accountable and turn the documents over to the RCMP. Thank you.
Heard from the Bloc this week, they're going to try and bring down the government. They gave them that deadline. The government didn't really respond in kind, How are you guys going to be approaching, confidence votes?
I don't really have anything more to add than what you heard from Jagmeet yesterday's press conference. For us, it's one day at a time, case-by-case issue. There's a lot of silly games being played in Parliament right now, but there's also a lot of serious work that we have to continue doing. Like, I'm a member of the Standing Committee on Public Safety. We're in the thick of looking at India's very serious criminal activity in Canada right now, which is not only has involved murder and extortion, but it has also infiltrated our political process right now. So all of that's going on right now. So we're not going to let ourselves be distracted by the silly games that are going on in the House. For us, one day at a time, case-by-case issue.
Is that key for you, just kind of resolving the whole questions of foreign interference before we go to an election? Is that key for you?
Well, I think for Canadians that are watching right now, certainly there have been a lot of questions raised. There's kind of a cloud of suspicion hanging over the House of Commons. We know that some members of the House, they've been implicated through the Hague Commission report, the NCCOP report. I think foreign interference is an extremely serious issue. My ultimate goal as a member of Parliament is I want to give Canadians the confidence that when they're electing people, those people only have Canada's interests at heart. I think from what we have seen, our foreign adversaries see Canada as a low-risk, high-reward environment to operate in. And I think we owe it to Canadians to dig a little deeper. I know our security agencies, our intelligence community, they're still trying to come to terms with the changes that we granted them legislatively through Bill C-70. So yeah, I think a little bit more time is needed just to make sure that our democratic process is secure for Canadians to have confidence in it.
The supply management lobby is like the NRA in the United States. It's that strong. What do you think of those?
Well, I obviously disagree. I think that the supply managed sector, like every sector in our economy, has the opportunity and should have the opportunity to, to give good testimony to whether it's the House of Commons or the Senate. But on supply management, we've been really clear as a government. We have passed it in the House of Commons has passed this legislation. I respect the work that the Senate has to do, and this is important work that they do. But I've also urged the Senate to put a top priority to this, and they have been doing that. So we'll make sure that they keep doing this really important work. But from the government side, I've been clear. The government has been clear. We are protecting the supply managed sector from future trade agreements.
But do you support it because you're influenced by the law?
I support it because it has been passed in the House of Commons, and it has been done so many, many months ago. And our government has been very clear. The Prime Minister has been clear. I've been clear. The Agriculture Minister has been clear. It's a really important sector to the Canadian economy. I'm negotiating trade agreements now with different parts of the world, and we can do that without including supply management in it. So thanks so much.
J'ai écouté le témoignage de John Manley au comité du Sénat qui étudie le projet de loi.
And for many, myself included, he was a friend and a mentor. One of those beneficiaries of his counsel was my friend, the Honorable Josie Osborne, who remembers his advice to her. He said, "Work hard, don't take yourself too seriously, listen to the people who elected you, take care of your friendships and relationships." That was Gerard. He spoke from the heart, and his plain-spoken words of wisdom will be forever with us. Thank you to Flo and the Jansen family for sharing Gerard with us all of these years.
The honourable member for Mississauga, Ehren Mills.
Mr. Speaker, the statistics on human trafficking in Canada are truly alarming. 93
Absolute trash right on the screen right now. I'm kind of covered up, but there's 2 pieces of trash on the screen I see.
3% of victims are Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and the greatest risk factor is being a woman. 65% of police-reported human trafficking incidents between 2010 and 2020 occurred in Ontario. Last week, my Mississauga Erin Mills Women's Council held a panel discussion to address this issue. It brought together key stakeholders and raised awareness about what we can do in our daily lives, including recognizing the signs of trafficking and how to support victims. Mr. Speaker, the time for action is now. I call on all members of this House to work tirelessly to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. And I would like to thank the Mississauga Erin Mills Women's Council for organizing this insightful event and for all the work that they do in our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
I rise today to honour a great Canadian, Robert Sopuck, who left us far too soon. This Saturday we'll come together to celebrate his extraordinary life alongside his beloved wife Carolyn, his family, his hunting partners, and many, many friends. Bob was a brilliant communicator. He was authentic, thoughtful, and honest. He was a fierce defender of the rural way of life and the greatest champion hunters, anglers, and trappers perhaps I've ever known. He believed that all those who live, work, and play on our natural landscapes are our best conservationists and the true environmentalists. As an MP, he developed the Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnership Program, and I believe it's safe to say Bob has saved more fish in this country than anybody else ever. He was loved and admired by his family, his friends, and all of those who he mentored. You lived life to the fullest, Bob, and we were privileged to be a part of it. We will miss you dearly, your honor, and we will honor your legacy by carrying on your work in conservation and protecting the natural world and defending the rural way of life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Speaker, last week was Media Literacy Week, dedicated to showcasing the power of digital literacy across Canada. In my community of Ottawa Centre, Media Smarts led an inspiring effort with their outstanding Break the Fake campaign, reviving the iconic house hippo to confront the rise of AI-generated deepfakes. This playful yet powerful symbol reminds us all to stay vigilant online. Supported by the federal government, this campaign rolled out exciting new resources, including AI literacy guides, lesson plans, and videos, all crafted to help Canadians identify and combat misinformation. The response was nothing short of remarkable. Media Literacy Week made around 4 million social media impressions, with 170 partner organizations hosting interactive workshops and events in classrooms, libraries, and community centers across the nation. Let's continue to work together to ensure that we provide digital media literacy to all Canadians to protect them from misinformation and disinformation. Thank you, Speaker.
The honourable member from Argentan-la-Petite-Nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday was a great day. We hit the milestone of 1 million Canadians who have received dental care from an oral health professional. Every year, more than 22,000 dental care providers receive 90% of care. Each year, many seniors end up in hospital because of untreated infections that could have been avoided if they had received medical assistance. Thousands of seniors are benefiting from these programs in Quebec and in my riding. As we're announcing this success, the leader of the Bloc Québécois has said that dental care program is poison and they're voting against it. More than 8,000 seniors are benefiting from this program in my riding each year. This program allows Canadians to remain in good health without having to pay hundreds of dollars out of pocket. And I'd ask the Bloc Québécois to share my message with their constituents.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government's record on violent crime is abysmal. The situation has become so bad that police officials across the country are fact-checking this Prime Minister's fake news. The Chief of Police in Peel said, quote, approximately 90% of the firearms that we seize are directly traced back to the United States. And I can say in reality that the remaining 10% are also likely from the U.S. And in Surrey, the police union sounded the alarm saying, quote, the federal government's handgun freeze fails to address the real issue, the surge of illegal firearms coming across our borders and ending up in the hands of violent criminals. The only people who've been impacted by this government's failed gun policies have been law-abiding hunters and sport shooters. Meanwhile, violent criminals and organized crime are benefiting from this government's bail, not jail policies. Canadians deserve a government that will bring home safe streets. Only common sense Conservatives have a plan to support our police, secure our borders, lock up the violent criminals, and stop the crime.
You're here. The honourable member for Newmarket Aurora.
Mr. Speaker, over 1 million Canadians across this country have now visited a dental care services provider through the Canada Dental Care Plan. I'm delighted to share with my constituents in Newmarket Aurora that the number of people receiving care under this plan will continue to rise, with over 977,000 people approved for the Canadian Dental Care Plan in Ontario. This is phenomenal news, knowing that my constituents can now access dental care, many for the first time, putting their health first. Mr. Speaker, I have seen firsthand the Canadian Dental Care Plan is making a huge difference in the lives of Canadians who need it the most. And I'm proud that our government is delivering that.
The honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, life has never been more expensive for Canadians. This week, Food Banks Canada released their annual hunger report, which found that visits to food banks are up 90% since 2019. This report found that over 2 million Canadians used food banks in a single month this year. Just this week, Karen Hsu, the executive director of the Barrie Food Bank, stated that the food bank is now supporting upwards of 7,000 people per month, 37% of which are children.
Wow.
Ms. Hsu went on to say that, quote, as demand continues to rise, we face increasing challenges in keeping up, often needing to make difficult choices about which foods to cut in order to stretch our donations further. Despite record-smashing food bank use, the NDP Liberals decided to hike their carbon tax by 23% earlier this spring.
Shameful.
As part of their plan to quadruple the carbon tax. This Prime Minister must call a carbon tax election so that a common-sense Conservative government can axe the tax on everything for everyone, everywhere, and bring home powerful paychecks and lower prices for all Canadians.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
We are cutting GST on new homes. The reviews are in, and it's a blockbuster. Listen to this. The Canadian Home Builders Association says today's announcement by the Conservative Party will make a big difference. The West End Home Builders Association, removing the GST from new home purchased for under $1 million may be the biggest significant housing policy in the past 2 decades. The Canadian Real Estate Association, this proposed step is a positive move toward lowering building costs, increasing housing supply, and making home ownership more attainable. Mike Moffat, the Prime Minister's housing advisor, wow, admire the boldness here. This will get more housing built. And Max Fawcett, columnist, big announcement. The Conservative team understands how to reach and activate young voters way better than the Liberals and the NDP right now. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberals are going to increase taxes, and we will axe the tax and build the homes.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, Canadians were shocked to learn that agents of the Indian government were involved in serious crimes on Canadian soil, including the murder of Canadian citizens. These actions by a foreign government are a clear violation of Canada's sovereignty and an attack on the safety of Canadians, particularly those in the Sikh and South Asian community. Yesterday, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security heard from leaders in the Sikh community who urged the Conservative Party leader to get his security clearance so that he can learn of current and former politicians and party members who may have collaborated with hostile foreign powers. We know that the leader of the Conservative Party will not listen to the countless national security experts who have called on him to get his security clearance, but maybe he will listen to the leaders of a community who has been the target of foreign interference and finally get his security clearance so that he can help protect Canada's national security.
The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat Langford.
I rise today to recognize veterans, a community I hold in very high regard. At the end of summer, I participated in the third annual Vancouver Island motorcycle run for homeless veterans, the men and women who faithfully served our country in uniform and now find themselves on the street. Last week, the annual vigil was held at the Cobble Hill Cenotaph to honor Corporal Nathan Cirillo and Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent and all those who lost their lives on Canadian soil in non-combat situations. I introduced Bill C-333 to formally recognize October 22nd as Peacetime Service and Sacrifice Memorial Day in their memory, and I urge the government to adopt this legislation. Veterans Week will commence next week. We will honor Indigenous Veterans Day on November 8th, and I will be joining my community for Remembrance Day at the Duncan Cenotaph with representatives laying wreaths for me at the other 4 ceremonies in my riding. As we wear our poppies in honor of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice, let us also commit to standing with those who remain.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Rimouski-Nejet, Témiscouata-les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, it's with great pride that we celebrate the triumph of grey owl cheese produced by Le Détour Cheese Dairy in Témiscouata sur le Lac. It was recently crowned best cheese in Quebec by the prestigious Sélection Caucus competition, which brings together Quebec's finest. Competing against 197 other cheeses from all regions of Quebec, Grey Owl's creamy taste won over the taste buds of the jury of 25 experts. This recognition not only highlights the unique craftsmanship of the Lower St. Lawrence region, but also the expertise and know-how of the Témiscouata region, a source of great pride for our corner of the world. Congratulations to Ginette Bégin, Mario Quirion, and the entire team at Le Détour Cheese Factory for your culinary masterpiece.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, there is one person responsible for propping up this costly and corrupt Prime Minister, and that is the leader of the NDP. Remember when he ripped up his coalition agreement with the Prime Minister? Turns out it was nothing more than a stunt to scam voters right before a by-election. This week, the leader of the NDP officially taped back together that agreement. But who can be surprised? Because after all, the leader of the NDP supports all of the disastrous policies of this Prime Minister, from the carbon tax to inflationary deficits to flooding our streets with hard drugs. He's nothing more than a sellout. Call a carbon tax election.
The honourable member for Niagara Centre.
Mr. Speaker, foreign interference is an issue that's detrimental to our national security and to the safety of all Canadians. National security experts like former directors of CSIS Richard Fadden and Ward Alcock have already urged all party leaders to get their national security clearance so that they can give and view and act on intelligence. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security heard from prominent leaders in the Sikh community who urged the Conservative Party leader to follow the example of all other party leaders and to get his national security clearance so that he can protect Canadians from foreign interference in his own party. But on this issue, the leader of the Conservative Party has chosen willful blindness. Shameful. And in doing so, he continues to put Canada's national security at risk. Yep. That is not leadership. Canadians expect and deserve better, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I guess the rumors are true.
Question oral. Oral questions. The honourable member for Calgary-Mindapore.
Let's get it going. Stephanie Cousy.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost of housing. A Conservative government will axe the federal GST on new homes sold. On an $800,000 home, this is a saving of $40,000. The CEO of Home West End Builders Association said that this is the most significant housing policy in 2 decades. This means more young people will get to buy a home. Will the Liberal NDP government axe the federal GST on housing sales so more young people can finally purchase a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, with these Conservatives, the proof is always in the pudding and the details are in the fine print. It really comes down to what they're going to cut in order to pay for that GST cut. And in this case, it's the Housing Accelerator Fund, which dozens of Conservative MPs have actually written to our Minister of Housing pleading with him for money for their towns and cities. So, Mr. Speaker, I pose the question back to the member. Do they really care about a Housing Accelerator Fund? Do their dozen members who have written to our Minister of Housing want the Housing Accelerator Fund for their towns and cities? Because it's not just up for renewal, Mr. Speaker, there's another round coming.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Mindeport.
Well, what Conservatives will do is end the failed Liberal housing programs that have led to the doubling of rents, mortgages, and down payments. The president of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario said, "We commend the leader of the official opposition for putting forward this program, and we hope that the provinces will do the same." The founder of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness said, "This is smart." So will the Prime Minister make the same commitment to help young Canadians who so desperately want to purchase a home and commit to axing the federal GST on new home sales?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, I'm glad the Conservative member confirmed that their plan is to cancel the Housing Accelerator Fund, and I wonder how that makes the dozen or so Conservative members who have been pleading with our Housing Minister for the funding for their towns and cities feel, Mr. Speaker. But speaking of feelings, we saw how the Conservatives feel about people who are underhoused and unhoused yesterday at committee, Mr. Speaker. The member from Peterborough, Kawartha, in a really disgusting display of how she feels about people who are homeless, underhoused, and unhoused. She said that they're the reason.
Sorry, guys, that's just CPAC.
That we have poverty in Canada. I said that's the reason why we have
Come on,
crime in
CPAC.
Canada, Mr. Speaker. Stigmatizing people who are underhoused, Mr. Speaker, that's not compassionate.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Mindeport.
Well, I will tell you what is disgusting, Mr. Speaker. Carbon tax Carney, conflict of interest Carney, is moving his headquarters out of Canada. This is the individual, Mr. Speaker, that is using his position as an advisor to lobby government. He is pocketing his profits as a member of the board of Stripe, and he is reaping the benefits of amortization rules through his role at Brookfield. So I'll tell you what's disgusting, Mr. Speaker. Why is this Prime Minister exempting conflict of interest Carney, carbon tax Carney, from conflict of interest laws? That's disgusting, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, what you see, Mr. Speaker, is as soon as somebody doesn't support what the Conservatives do, they're slandered and attacked. And incendiary language is used about an individual in this instance who's served his country in so many different capacities, both as Governor of the Bank of Canada, was also Governor of the Bank of England, is recognized internationally as making incredible contributions to the world and its thinking about finance. And what we get from the party opposite is ad hominem attacks, personal insults, all because they don't share their opinion. That's concerning, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, Halloween is over now. It's time for this Liberal bloc to take off its costume and its rose-tinted glasses. Every month in Quebec, there are nearly 3 million requests for food assistance, which is 13% more than last year. Families are suffering under the weight of these Liberal bloc taxes. When will this government finally recognize that it's failed and let Canadians have an election?
Minister of Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we heard something truly scary from the leader of the Conservatives. He said he will cut 2 programs and more beyond that. There is There's no doubt in my mind that Conservative cut.
Sorry, gang, I don't know what's acting up here.
This government claims that it has invested $62 million to help do something about food insecurity. But meanwhile, community organization Moissons Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean has not received any of that money. This situation has been created by this Liberal bloc government. Why does this government prefer feeding Ottawa's bureaucracy instead of families in Quebec and Canada?
Secretary, l'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Merci.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Feeding our kids is a priority in Quebec and Canada. The Conservatives and the Bloc Quebec
All right, guys, just hang tight here.
voted against a great plan to help our kids at school.
We've got a plan, and the plan is to get a different source from, of the question period.
Voted against all those measures. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, seniors are not asking for handouts. They're just asking for what's fair after building Quebec with their own hands. They're asking for an end to this Liberal discrimination, which is depriving seniors from 65 to 74 at a time when in Quebec, the price of housing has increased 50% since 2020 in towns like Trois-Rivières or Rimouski. A 10% pension increase is really not too much to ask. Why are the Liberals continuing to do everything they can to discriminate among seniors? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We need to take care of our seniors, and one way we're doing that is offering them dental care. As my colleague knows, thousands of seniors have benefited from this plan in Quebec in her own riding, even though the Bloc Québécois voted against it. And yet every senior is getting $731 on average to improve their dental health, and that's without even getting into the guaranteed income supplement increase. Mr. Speaker, if anyone is actually helping seniors, it's the Liberal Party.
For Cowichan, Malahat Langford.
Mr. Speaker, BC food banks are struggling. More people than ever visit them and donations are down, and all the while greedy grocery CEOs line their pockets. For 3 years, food prices have skyrocketed while Liberals refuse to stand up to greedy CEOs to lower prices. And meanwhile, the Conservatives point the finger at everything else except those CEOs who are gouging people. These CEOs need to be put on notice. Lower your prices or face a price cap on essential foods. The only question remains, will the Liberals have the courage to do it? Yes or no?
Here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, our government knows that the best way to get food prices down is to increase competition in the market. That's why we've worked with every member, every party in this House to advance our competition laws in this country. We've also injected new cash and capital into addressing food insecurity. The top ask of Food Banks Canada and many other food security organizations for years and years was to fund a national school food program. That's real support for Canadians that are at the food bank. It's essentially taking 400,000 kids out of those food bank lineups. That's real progress, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are ignoring rising food insecurity, something Manitobans know all too well. Over 50,000 people in Manitoba now rely on food banks. And Harvest Manitoba president says we're moving in the wrong direction. Obviously, the Liberals' backdoor talks with grocer CEOs are going nowhere. And Conservatives are listening to lobbyists and staying silent on price gouging. So will the Liberals adopt the NDP strategy of capping food prices and ending hunger?
Here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, our government has been committed to making life more affordable for Canadians. We've done a number of things that have reduced household expenses for Canadians. The childcare fees, 50% reduction, that's $800 a month in savings for the average family. That's significant savings. That's savings that Canadians can use, their families can use to pay for groceries. We've also offered a grocery rebate. We've offered a 50% reduction in childcare fees. We've offered pharmacare and a national school food program. All of these measures make life more affordable for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, they are not worth the cost of housing. As just reported by Scotiabank, young Canadians are abandoning the dream of ever owning a home. Over half said they must delay home buying plans due to the current economic situation, and more are living with parents or family than just 3 years ago. Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes sold. On an $800,000 house, this is a savings of $40,000 or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments. Will the NDP Liberals axe the federal GST on housing so more young Canadians can finally buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, the details are really important, and this week the leader of the Conservative Party admitted that he was going to pay for that tax cut by axing the National Housing Accelerator Fund and other important programs which are supporting Canadians. And in response to that, Saskatoon's mayor said that a recent pledge from the federal Conservative Party leader to cancel the National Housing Accelerator Fund would put hundreds of already approved housing units in peril. This is true affordable housing, Mr. Speaker, not million-dollar condos, as my colleague opposite was talking about. Affordable housing for people in need in Saskatoon are in peril with this Conservative leader's plan.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the housing minister himself said that program doesn't actually lead to the construction of specific homes. Right. Conservatives will end failed Liberal housing programs that led to the doubling of rent, mortgages, and down payment costs. The Canadian Real Estate Association said the Conservative plan to axe the sales tax on homes is, quote, a positive move forward, lowering building costs, increasing housing supply, and making home ownership more attainable for Canadians, unquote. Will the NDP Liberals axe the GST, federal GST on housing so more young Canadians can finally build a home or buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bait and switch in classic form. They say it's a cut, they're right. They're going to cut the Housing Accelerator Fund. They're going to cut out the ability of tens of thousands of Canadians to access affordable housing. They're going to undercut their own MPs who want the Housing Accelerator Fund to continue. This is absolutely mischaracterization of what they're trying to do. I don't know how any Canadians can take these guys seriously.
The Honourable Member for Cariboo Prince George.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing. He has single-handedly destroyed the dreams of Canadians who now believe that they will never be able to afford a home. But hope is on the horizon. Our common sense plan will axe the federal sales tax on new homes, saving Canadians up to $50,000. Will the Prime Minister axe the federal GST on housing so young Canadians can finally afford a home?
Great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're finally glad that the Conservative leader is being honest with Canadians. This week, he finally admitted that he will cut 2 programs and many more. One of those programs is a program that we fought on this side of the House for tooth and nail to get the Housing Accelerated Fund over the finish line. Why? Because municipalities for many years have been saying they need more capacity to speed up the process of home building. In Richmond Hill, Ontario, that's $31 million for 41,000 new homes. The mayor there, what does the member opposite say to the mayor, David West?
The Honourable Member for Cariboo Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, I've seen the Honourable colleague's polls. He should be more interested in dusting off his resume and updating his LinkedIn profile. Mr. Speaker, our common sense Conservative plan will axe the GST on new homes, saving Canadians up to $50,000. Under the Prime Minister, the cost of housing has skyrocketed. His housing plan has only doubled the bureaucracy and red tape. It hasn't even built a single home. Will the Prime Minister axe the tax on housing so Canadians can finally afford to put a roof over their head?
Great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We're catching a glimpse of what those members would do if they were ever fortunate enough to sit on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. They would gut the programs that municipalities have been asking us to deliver to help them speed up the process of building more affordable homes for Canadians. That's truly appalling. Yep. What would the member opposite say to Mayor David West when he says it would be a shame to put that funding into jeopardy? How can the Conservatives stand up in this House and claim that they have a better solution to the affordable housing crisis than us? We have the most comprehensive plan in Canadian history.
Yes.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, the cost of housing has skyrocketed. He broke the promise of the Canadian dream, that if young people worked hard, they could get good paychecks, put food on the table, and buy a house to raise their families. But now today, according to Desjardins, young people need to wait 10 to 15 years more than their parents before they can buy a home. Will this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc Québécois, will this Prime Minister accept our proposal to help young people by cutting the GST on new houses and condos? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Affordable housing is a priority for our government. But the Conservative Party does not have a plan.
What the Conservatives want to do, they want to cut tax on million-dollar condos and then put in jeopardy truly affordable housing. We want to make sure that everybody can afford a home, whether they're buying a condo or renting in a cooperative, or if they need to access shelter space, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Conservatives are making it abundantly clear to Canadians who they are. They don't care about people who are struggling to pay their bills. They don't care about people who are renting their homes or living in cooperatives or shelter spaces. They just want to help the wealthy.
The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this Liberal bloc has doubled rents, mortgages, and deposits. And now the Prime Minister wants to make the red tape even worse and increase costs even further. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader has proposed cutting the GST on affordable housing. In fact, all housing from $0 to $1 million, all of that housing would be GST free. Quebec's Property Owners Association believes that this is a good idea. Will the Prime Minister put an end to his photo op programs that don't actually lead to homes getting built? Will he do the right thing? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We know that the Leader of Opposition doesn't know how to build affordable housing. When he was the Minister of Housing, he only built 6 affordable houses. They don't even know the definition of affordable homes. They don't know that people actually need a place to rent before they buy. They don't know that there are programs like Rent to Buy or Rent Geared to Income that actually exist, Mr. Speaker. While as our government, we've invested billions in new cooperative housing. And the other thing is, Mr. Speaker, Conservative premiers across this province have not had a housing plan. The Conservative leader of Ontario, for example, has cut funding for affordable housing, Mr. Speaker. Truly affordable housing aren't million-dollar condos.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Percheurs. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow marks 500 days since this House passed Bill C-282 to protect supply management within trade agreements. And we're all wondering why 2 Liberal-appointed senators, Peter Beam and Peter Harder, we're all wondering why they're blocking this bill. But I think we got a clue yesterday. Former Liberal Minister John Manley, who was a leading light under Jean Chrétien, compared our farmers to the NRA gun lobby. He said we should ignore our farmers and that adopting C-282 would turn Canada into a regime like North Korea. Is he saying the quiet parts of a Liberal's perspective out loud? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
My honourable colleague is fully aware just over 50 years ago the Liberal government established the supply management program. My honourable colleague is well aware that over the last 50 years we have fully supported the supply management program. We have and will continue to support the supply management program and push our colleagues in the other place to pass Bill C-282. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.
The Honourable Member. After 500 days of blocking the legislation, it's reasonable to wonder whether Peter Beam and Peter Harder are part of an anti-supply management movement in the Liberal Party, like John Manley. It's insulting to compare our farmers to the deadliest lobby in the U.S. and comparing our farmers and protecting our agriculture, small-scale agriculture system to a totalitarian regime is unbelievably insulting. And all of that from a big name under Jean Chrétien, who may well have an outsized influence on the Liberal Party. Will the Liberals unreservedly condemn what John Manley said and ask the Senate to pass C-282?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I can assure my honourable colleague I'm well aware of the importance of the supply management program. I milked cows for half of my life. I'm well aware what the supply management means to the agricultural sector and to this country. I can assure my honourable colleague we will continue to support supply management and we will continue to push the Senate to pass Bill C-282. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, news is breaking today that Brookfield Asset Management, a multi-tentacled everything corporation that's chaired by Mark Carbon Tax Carney, will be moving its head office out of Canada. This news comes after reports that for several years, Brookfield's effective tax rate will be well below the new global minimum tax rate of 15%. Carney is the Liberals' senior economic advisor. Why are the Liberals letting Canada's economy be run by a man who puts profit over people?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here it is again. If you aren't a Conservative, you're on a hit list. You are going to be identified and attacked and vilified. It doesn't matter what your contributions were to your country or the world. Your character will be maligned and attacked. And that's exactly what this is, an ad hominem, baseless attack to try to intimidate and scare people from providing commentary and ideas to this government. And that's what Mark Carney is doing. He's providing his thoughts and ideas on a voluntary basis to this government. And I can tell you what they're trying to do is intimidate anybody from giving good advice.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Well, the reality is that Mark Carbon Tax Carney is moving Brookfield's headquarters to Wall Street to avoid paying Canadian tax. The reality is that Mark Carbon Tax Carney gets paid more if Brookfield pays less tax. And the reality is that while he's helping his company pay less corporate tax, he wants every Canadian to pay more carbon tax. Why are the Liberals letting Canada's economy, again, be run by a man who clearly puts profit over people?
The Honourable Minister.
Interesting, the Conservatives weren't attacking this individual before he offered to help and give ideas on a voluntary basis. It as soon as he identified that he wants to support the country by offering economic advice, they want to attack him, because anybody who has ideas that doesn't support them becomes a villain, becomes somebody to attack. And that's the kind of country they want to create, where either you're a friend or you're an enemy. Either you agree with them or you attack them. Mark Carney's made incredible contributions to this country and to this world. They should be ashamed with the way they're behaving.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Carbon Tax Carney is this Prime Minister's top economic advisor, and he's moving his $1 trillion international investment firm out of Canada and to another country. Carbon Tax Carney will now be advising this Liberal Prime Minister from Wall Street. These two economic vandals have quadrupled the carbon tax on Canadians, while Carbon Tax Carney's jet setting off to New York City. It's profits over people, while the Prime Minister exempts Carbon Tax Carney from Canada's conflict of interest laws. So why is the Prime Minister exempting now conflict of interest Carney from ethics laws while he operates his company from Wall Street?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Okay, the Honourable Minister.
Well, it's clear that that member, from reading his statement, has spent his day trying to malign the character of a good Canadian. I can tell you that I'm not reading notes right now because I spent my morning working on pharmacare and dental care and trying to connect care to people. And I should wonder if he would go and say to his constituents, you know what I did today? I attacked the character of a wonderful Canadian. I spent my morning thinking of ways to come up with slogans and attack lines to somebody who served his country in the world. That's not how I spent my morning. I spent my morning thinking about Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
that minister and his government spent their morning making life more unaffordable for Canadians, sending record numbers of Canadians to line up at food banks, doubling mortgages, doubling rents. That's the record of this Liberal government, and that failure of a health minister with records number of Canadians who don't have a doctor. And this exemplary Canadian that they claim in conflict of interest, Carbon Tax Carney, let's talk about what he did since he got that job. He got Brookfield into negotiations for 10 billion Canadian tax dollars. His credit card company Stripe is now gouging Canadian small businesses, and he's been exposed for lobbying illegally UK ministers in the heat pump hustle. It's unacceptable. What can we have a carbon?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, while we're used to that member playing politics in this House and attacking and maligning the character of great Canadians, but let me reference a member that these individuals on the Conservative benches like to quote over and over and over again. Yesterday, the food professor Sylvain Charlebois at Indu Committee said climate change is the agri-food sector's greatest challenge and we need to address it, which is very interesting because if you listen to the Conservatives every day complain and holler about food prices in this country, you'd think that they had a plan or some form of solution, but they do not have a plan to...
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Canadians cannot find a family doctor, and labour shortages in construction are driving up the cost of housing. The Liberals portray migrant workers with the empty promises that they'll give them full status, including those in construction and healthcare. To add insult to injury, the Liberals is allocating a pathetic 50 spots for regularization in their 2025 levels plan. It's literally not worth the paper it's written on. Just what sort of sick joke is this?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Coming out of the pandemic, health workforce issues around the globe were incredibly serious. We just had the Kai-Hai report came out that showed that Canada is leading the world to coming out of the pandemic. We have, when it comes to surgical wait times and surgical wait lists, returning to the levels before the pandemic. The Kai-Hai report also showed that almost every jurisdiction in the country has more doctors and more nurses. We also were able to, that is 100% true. And what else is true is that's before we signed a deal with every province, every territory to put $200 billion in. So that data is before the dollars that we've actioned to move forward on healthcare.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I recently met with a healthcare worker in Terrace whose job as a psychiatric occupational therapist is critical in addressing the toxic drug and mental health crises in our communities. She's the only graduate from her class that's working in a northern rural community. But here's the thing. This government's student loan forgiveness program excludes occupational therapists. This is clearly an oversight, and my question for the government is a very simple one. Will it correct its error and ensure that people like this person in Terrace, BC, get the loan forgiveness that they so deserve?
Here.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I was with the member in Terrace, and he's absolutely right. There are very significant challenges in rural and remote communities. I absolutely am looking forward to talking to him on that issue. Our loan forgiveness program for doctors and nurses and hygienists and physiotherapists has been a tremendous success in helping with workforce issues. I want to expand that, but I would call on him to work with us on health data because it's one of the main things that can help us in rural and remote communities. Right now, the Conservatives have taken hostage this Parliament. They will not allow a data bill to move forward, which will save lives and is critically needed, is nonpartisan. Let's get to work. Let's pass that bill.
The Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, foreign interference is on the rise, and so is the spread of misinformation. In fact, there have been disturbing allegations this past week that parliamentarians are collaborating with foreign actors. Can the government please set the record straight for all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Foreign interference is serious, and our government is firmly addressing this. It's why it's essential that we get the facts right. Unlike the member for Spadina Fort York, who has been spreading false claims, I want to be clear. I have undergone full security screening, and I do have security clearance as a minister of the Crown. My question to this House is, why won't the Conservative leader get his security clearance so that he can protect Canadians in this country?
The Honourable Member from Montmagny, Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this Bloc Liberal coalition isn't worth the cost of housing. Our leader has announced that we will eliminate the GST on housing units under $1 million. This was welcomed by a number of stakeholders, including the Corporation of Landlords of Quebec, which said, quote, the Conservative leader's proposal is another good idea to bring down housing costs, an initiative that goes in the right direction, end quote. Will the Bloc-supported Liberals finally get rid of the federal tax on housing, or will they continue wasting money on photo ops? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
On the topic of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which the Conservatives have committed to cut if they were to form government, I wonder if he's had a conversation with the member, his colleague from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, or the member from Simcoe North, or the member from Fundy Royal, or the member from St. Albert, Edmonton, or perhaps the member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, because all of those Conservative members have written letters to our Minister of Housing asking him for the Housing Accelerator Fund to help their towns build more units. We're talking about real affordable housing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lille-Kamouraska Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, this Bloc Liberal government has doubled housing costs, doubled down payments, doubled mortgage costs, doubled the debt. We, on the other hand, would get rid of the federal tax on housing units under $1 million. This will allow Canadians to save up to $50,000. That's what we call common sense. Will this Bloc Liberal government finally open its eyes and use our idea to give Canadians and Quebecers a little bit of breathing room? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
You know who else used to say common sense a lot? It was Premier Mike Harris from Ontario in the early 90s. You know what we got from that common sense? We got Walkerton. We got deaths from dirty water. You know what else we got? We got dangerous cuts to community housing that had put in peril my mom's job and where we lived at Chautauqua Co-op when I was growing up. But it's not just Conservative MPs asking the Minister of Housing to keep the Housing Accelerator Fund and make sure their towns and cities get it. It's also dozens of mayors across the country, including Saskatoon's mayor, the mayor of Richmond Hill, the mayor of Kingston, Thunder Bay, St. John, Saskatoon, Surrey, Cambridge, Barrie. I could go on, Mr. Speaker. Everybody needs the Housing Accelerator Fund.
The Honourable Member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals are not worth the cost of housing, common sense Conservatives have announced a plan that will axe the federal sales tax on new homes that's universally been seen as a game changer. On an $800,000 house, this tax cut will save homebuyers $40,000 and $2,200 a year in mortgage payments. After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, they've doubled rent, doubled mortgage payments, and doubled down payments. Mr. Speaker, will the NDP Liberals axe the federal GST on housing so more Canadians, young Canadians, can afford to buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, on the Housing Accelerator Fund, I just named 5 or 6 Conservative members of Parliament who have written to the Minister of Housing to ask for the Housing Accelerator Fund, but I didn't mention a former Conservative member of Parliament who's now the mayor of Barrie in that member's constituency. Former Conservative member of Parliament Alex Nuttall has actually written to the Minister of Housing and said, please, don't cancel the Housing Accelerator Fund. We need the Housing Accelerator Fund. It costs money to build affordable housing. We need the federal government at the table. Please, continue to help us build affordable housing and don't cut the HST.
The Honourable Member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and obviously that member is still on a sugar high from Halloween. I have actually spoke to the City of Barrie Mayor. I spoke to him yesterday, in fact, and they have set the standards on building permits and processing across the country. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that Mayor Nuttall and Council
From the top, the Honourable Member for Barrie-Innisfil.
It takes a Conservative, Mr. Speaker, to get the job done, and they did it before the National Housing Accelerator Fund was announced. They've set the standard on building permits and processing, and the fact is that the City of Barrie, its mayor and its council, stand to gain better from our Building Homes Not Bureaucracy plan, because we're going to be in it for the long term, just not for another couple of years. So, Mr. Speaker, why won't the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition support our GST tax cut so more younger Canadians can afford to buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't have said it better myself. The member opposite is right. Barrie has cut red tape. They have improved wait times for approvals. They have done all of those things because they received the Housing Accelerator Fund. I want to congratulate the mayor of Barrie, the former Conservative member of Barrie, that member's predecessor. Alex Nuttall has been a great mayor to the people of Barrie, and he has worked with the Housing Accelerator Fund. Mr. Speaker, it actually took a Conservative with Liberal policies to solve affordable housing crises across the country, and that includes Alex Nuttall and Barrie, and I thank him for being a champion of the Housing Accelerator Fund.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi James Bay Nunavik EU. Advanced directives on medical assistance in dying are now legal in Quebec. This is a major victory for people like Sandra de Montigny, who suffers from early onset Alzheimer's, but there have been no gains in terms of legal protections for doctors. The College of Physicians has noted that under the Criminal Code, advanced directives are still illegal. This means that some physicians will refuse their patients' directives out of a fear of legal repercussions. Will the government finally show compassion and amend the Criminal Code to allow advanced directives? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout Canada's history, advanced directives have been illegal. Now we are having a national conversation, something that is absolutely essential, because a change as big as the one we are contemplating requires a major conversation with all the provinces and territories. There must also be conversations in each Canadian's household. I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's. It was a tragic thing to go through. An issue as sensitive as this one requires a national conversation. The Honourable Member for Abitibi James Bay Nunavik EU. A House of Commons committee has already carried out a serious study on advanced directives. All the experts have already been heard. Quebec also carried out broad consultations before amending its laws. The College of Physicians, the Quebec Bar, patient associations, the National Assembly. Who is left for the Liberals to consult? The Conservative religious right? While the Liberals delay, doctors and patients are getting worried. When will they amend the Criminal Code? The Honourable Minister of Health. It's a good question. It's worth asking what the Conservative position is on this issue, because they're staying suspiciously silent. I wonder what their position is. As for the rest of the member's question, it is essential to ensure that our system is ready for such a change. A change as major as the one we are contemplating requires time and conversations, not too much time. A report will be published by March, and we will continue holding these sorts of discussions with the country.
Hey, Margaret.
Statistics Canada confirmed this week that under the NDP Liberals, Canadians are getting poorer. Statistics Canada tracks the prosperity of Canadians. And in 8 of the last 9 quarters, they report that Canadians are getting poorer. And what is worse is that the Royal Bank predicts the Liberal legacy is going to continue. This is why more than half of Canadians are struggling to pay for their everyday essentials. Meanwhile, U.S. prosperity grew by 2.8%. Will the Prime Minister reverse the Liberal recession and axe the taxes that are making Canadians poorer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's time for a history lesson from my colleague. You know, our government since 2015, we've invested in Canadians, we've invested in the Canadian economy, we've invested in the business world, we've invested in our community organization. But lesson number 2, Mr. Speaker, when they were in power in 2014, they made major budget cuts on the back of our men and women who serve. Do you remember they closed 9 of the veteran offices right across the country, one of which was in Nova Scotia? But good news, Mr. Speaker, yesterday was the 8th anniversary of the reopening of the veteran office in Nova Scotia. I would
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Well, there's a typical NDP Liberal Nova Scotian who thinks that Canadians have never had it so good. He thinks that quadrupling the carbon tax, which he wants to do, is good for Canadians, that they're increasing housing taxes, that increasing job-killing capital gains taxes are good for Canadians. Well, let me tell you what The Economist says. The Economist says now that Canada is poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the U.S. The Economist also says that over the last 5 years, the U.S. economic growth has doubled. Canada's. The Financial Post says Canadian standard of living decline is the worst in 40 years. Will the Prime Minister axe the taxes that are making Canadians...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, you know what the Conservatives are talking about right now? They're talking about making cuts. The question is, what cuts is he going to be making with his leader and his government? So they want to make cuts to child care. They want to make cuts to daycare, $10 a day. They want to make cuts to dental care. They want to make cuts to pharmacare. Mr. Speaker, I even heard that they're going to move the retirement age from 65 to 67. No, I heard 67, 68, 69. What is it? Let's have the real truth. Share with Canadians. How many cuts are you going to make? When are you making the cuts? We're ready. We want to hear. Canadians want to know where you're going to make those cuts.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd.
Canadians are struggling with skyrocketing costs on everything from groceries to gas, and now we see the toll it's taken on our economy. Statistics Canada confirms what families already know. This NDP Liberal coalition is not worth the cost. GDP per person has dropped 8 out of the last 9 quarters. Meanwhile, in the U.S., GDP grew by nearly 3% last quarter. Why? Because NDP Liberals keep taxing Canadians into the ground with their hikes on the carbon tax, the housing tax, and the job-killing capital gains tax. So will the Prime Minister finally axe these tax hikes that are driving Canadians into poverty?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, time and time again, we hear in this House Conservatives speaking up for vulnerable people. But then what do they say when they're in committee, Mr. Speaker? Listen to this. The member from Peterborough, Kawartha, said, quote, "Guess what happens when you don't have a house? You go commit crime because you're in poverty." Mr. Speaker, it's shameful that as we stand up to lift Canadians up, Conservatives use vulnerable people as props and then demonize them and blame them for crime in this country. It's truly shameful, and Canadians should see through their rhetoric.
The Honourable Member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Mr. Speaker, over 1 million Canadians have now accessed care through the Canadian Dental Care Plan, and with close to 363,000 British Columbians who were approved to receive care, that number will continue to soar. Now, despite this success, Conservatives are quick to say that they'll gut the programs that are helping Canadians. 1 out of 4 Canadians said they skipped a dental visit because they couldn't afford it. Can the Minister of Health please inform this House how the CDCP is helping Canadians with affordability and helping them to put their health first?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, I want to thank the member who's such an advocate for health, and I know he's a Canucks fan, so if you look at this, well, I'm taking a guess he's a Canucks fan, but if you are, he is, okay, he's nodding. Imagine 50 times you could fill that stadium with Canucks fans, and that's how many Canadians we're talking about with 1 million people. And yesterday, when I was in Scarborough, I talked to Manjeet. You know, Manjeet, Mr. Speaker, let me know that he had a tooth extracted, cost him $700. This was a whole bunch of years ago. He was terrified to go to the dentist again. He had pain in his mouth. He said, I wouldn't go. Now he's going, because he's got a plan, he's got the coverage. That's what this plan is.
The Honourable Member for Bow River.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is just not worth it. Just this week, the Calgary Food Bank reported more people needed them than ever before. 200% increase since 2019, 30% increase in the last year. Nearly 40% were employed, higher than the national average. Constituents like Kim write me, "This coalition will cost me my house, my mode of transportation, and any semblance of quality of life that I have left." Will the Prime Minister give Canadians relief and call a carbon tax election?
Great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I have one word: hypocritical. That's what you call it when people say they care about something and then do the exact opposite. Like when Conservatives say they care about people who have to use a food bank, but then want to cut a program that's going to feed 400,000 more kids per year. Like when Conservatives say they care about violent crime, but then they want to make it easier for criminals to get guns. Like when Conservatives say they care about foreign interference, but their leader won't even step up to get a security clearance to protect Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we can't believe anything the Conservatives say in this House.
The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
After 9 years, it's clear this NDP Liberal government is simply not worth the cost. Food Banks Canada now states that the need for their services is spiraling out of control. In Manitoba, food bank usage has increased 122% since the pandemic, with over 50,000 people relying on them each month. The CEO of Harvest Manitoba says that this is absolutely unprecedented. Yet the NDP Liberal government's plans to raise the cost of food further by quadrupling the carbon tax. So when will the Prime Minister simply end the pain and let Canadians vote in a carbon tax election?
Great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Hunger Report from Food Banks Canada is an important document, and I hope my colleague opposite actually reads it, because they make 4 recommendations. Rebuild the social safety net, invest in truly affordable housing, support lower-income workers, and address the northern and remote food insecurity issue. That's 108 pages, Mr. Speaker, but it doesn't mention the carbon tax once. You know why? Because they know that the Canada Carbon Rebate achieves those 4 things. It invests in lower-income Canadians. It makes sure that food insecurity is addressed for those communities, Mr. Speaker. If the member opposite wants to quote the food banks, he ought to read the report and make the same recommendations those poverty elimination experts do.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
The Liberals' Indigenous contracting scandal is the biggest Liberal scandal yet. The Liberal government used the Indigenous contracting program to send money to well-connected, non-Indigenous insiders using shell companies, shady joint ventures, and outright fabrication. Indigenous leaders say that most of those who benefited from this program are shell companies. Most. Will these fraudsters and their Liberal enablers be held accountable? Will they pay back the money they took from taxpayers and from real Indigenous businesses?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women and Gender Equality.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Indigenous partners have been absolutely clear on this point. Indigenous procurement programs have been essential to supporting Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs and creating jobs at Indigenous-led businesses. And initial reports show that the government is exceeding the 5% targets. And we are already speaking with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis partners and business leaders and financial institutions to figure out what's working, what's not working, and how we can make it even better.
The honourable member for Bonavista, Buren Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, 1 million Canadians, let me repeat that, 1 million Canadians are not receiving care under the Canadian Dental Care Plan. This plan is changing the lives of Canadians and helping them get access to the dental care they need. Conservatives voted against this. Can the minister share with this House what he is hearing from Canadians about the Canadian Dental Care Plan and why this plan is here to stay?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 million in 6 months. It is fantastic, and it's connecting people to care all across the country. And I want to thank the member for Bonavista, Buren Trinity, for his incredible advocacy. You know, we were in Clarenville together, and we were able to talk really on the ground about what this meant for people in his riding, connecting them to care, the dignity of a smile that they can be proud of, preventative care. You know, it was just, and then afterwards I went to Gander, we talked to Dr. Redmond, found 3 oral cancers just in the last number of months that wouldn't have been found. This is saving lives. This is giving people dignity, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has the longest coastline in the world, but the Liberals have abandoned our coasts and coastal communities, just like the Conservatives did. Recently, the Liberals cut the Ghost and Derelict Fishing Gear Cleanup Fund, closed lighthouses, cut funding to deal with invasive green crab, and are still allowing a massive ship to be dismantled in a sensitive ecosystem. And this is only a snapshot of all their failures for coastal communities. When is this minister going to stop letting coastal communities down?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister, DFO.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you won't be surprised that I think have the opposite view on that. In fact, if you look at coastal communities in British Columbia, we're putting forward a transition in terms of salmon, farm salmon in BC. We're taking things seriously. We're not pontificating on what is wrong and making judgments. We're curious about what British Columbians need. What they need is good paying jobs. They need a government that takes safety seriously. That is so important. There's a lot in that question that I would like to unpack. I wish I had 10 more minutes, because I had to have 10 more minutes of answers on what this government is doing well.
And the honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, last fall, this government gave an HST exemption to for-profit developers of rental units to help address the housing crisis, but left out non-profit, affordable homeownership builders like Habitat for Humanity. In my community, Habitat's Keel Street build would have had an extra $1 million for affordable units had this been in place. And the federal government could pay for it by ending tax exemptions for large corporate investors who buy up existing units and raise rents. So will this government include this important measure in the fall economic statement?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the members' advocacy for Habitat for Humanity. I recently had a meeting with them as well because they opened a new restore in Milton. So congratulations to Habitat for Humanity, and thanks to them for building thousands and thousands of homes for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And I'd also like to thank the member from the Green Party's advocacy on cooperative housing. And since this is the last question, I'd just like to congratulate my mom on 30 years of cooperative housing work in Mississauga. She's retiring on Sunday, Mr. Speaker. And we need more co-op housing in Canada. We need more co-op housing workers. We need more community coordinators like my mom, Beata. So congratulations on 35 years, Mom.
And congratulations to your mom as well. I see the honourable member for Winnipeg Centre standing on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. During
Well, now, ain't that something? So I'm just going to wrap up. People criticize the microphone. It sounds fine on this end. Anyways, just going to wrap up. I tried, like I said, now I've been up for 28 hours. I worked really hard at getting the chat to display the way that it has. It's really busy doing that. Don't really have a chance to speak, and also that people were criticizing the microphone. So anyhow, we're going to just wrap up. You guys have a great weekend. Thank you all for tuning in. I've got to get some rest and figure out what we're going to do about that, because that's extremely busy. It's been a wild week in Canadian federal politics. It certainly has. And yeah, we'll... Anyhow, gang, we're just wrapping up. I've got new software. I can't run the things I normally run. I wanted to do those text things. Leave it in the comments, not in the chat. Leave it in a comment if you like the look of the chats being broadcasted that way. I think it's interesting. Anyhow, thank you all for tuning in. We're getting out. You guys have a great weekend. And yeah, this is just this is a weak outro, guys. I know it is. I'll get something set up. Anyhow, Ehren, Canadian Looney. See, I'm so tired. I didn't even like, subscribe, share, get notified, all those fun things. Thank you so much. It's been a blast, and I'm not good enough at multitasking these things yet. We'll learn. First time it worked. I do have to figure out the mic if there's a problem or not. We'll take a peek at that. Later, gang. Much appreciated. All the new viewers that tuned in today. Welcome, and an amazing chat room. We're going to improve it. We're going to make it better. You guys have a great weekend. We'll be chatting soon. Take care. This is a week extra, but this is always.